All right, so get this. Today we're going deep into IVF, but like with a twist.
Ooh, a twist. I like twists.
Right, we're talking double donation IVF. That's where both the egg and the sperm are from donors.
I see. I see. So not just one or the other, both.
Exactly. You've probably heard about egg donation or sperm donation, separately, but what happens when you put them together?
Right, right. Like what are the ins and outs, the implications?
Yeah, yeah, all that. And we're using this awesome article from OVU.com. It's called Egg and Sperm Donation IVF. Super informative.
Sounds like a good one.
Definitely is. Okay, so first things first, let's clear the air. I mean, not everyone's going to be familiar with double donation IVF.
Yeah, it's definitely not as talked about as like the other types of IVF.
For sure. So what is it exactly? Like in a nutshell.
Okay, so basically we're taking donated eggs and donated sperm. You create embryos in a lab, and then those embryos get transferred to the prospective mother's uterus.
Okay, so kind of like a recipe,
Ah.
but with, a whole lot of science involved. Right.
Yeah, exactly. A very precise recipe with some pretty high stakes.
That's one way to put it. So we know how it works, but who is this really for?
Yeah.
Like who actually benefits from double donation IVF?
You know, it might surprise you, but it's actually a pretty wide range of people. Of course, you have couples who are dealing with infertility, like on both sides.
Makes sense, yeah.
But it's not just them. There are also couples who are, maybe concerned about passing down genetic diseases.
Right, right, right. I can see how that would be a factor.
Definitely. And then you also have, single women or female couples who can't use their own eggs.
So it's like a solution for different situations, not just one specific problem.
Absolutely. And you even see it with couples who have had, complications with other IVF attempts. Like they've tried other things and it just hasn't worked out.
So it's almost like a last resort for some couples, but also a really viable option right from the start for others.
Exactly. It really depends on the individual circumstances,
For sure. So let's talk advantages. What are some of the benefits of choosing double donation IVF over like the other methods?
Okay, well, according to this OVU.com article, the success rates are really impressive. We're talking 82% success over one cycle.
Wow, that's high.
It is. And it can even get as high as 94% over 3 cycles.
Wow. So why is it so successful?
Part of it is the screening process. They screen donors super carefully, like for a ton of genetic disorders, something like 600 to 3,000. Can you believe that?
Seriously, that many?
Yeah. So that obviously reduces the risk of those disorders being passed down, and it also tends to mean fewer pregnancy complications.
Okay, so it's like peace of mind for the parents knowing they're getting, healthy genetic material.
Right, exactly. And there's also this advantage of what they call premium donors.
Premium donors, what's that all about?
So these are donors with specific traits, like maybe certain physical characteristics or even talents, and they might even travel internationally for the procedure.
Wait, what? Travel internationally? That's like a whole other level of
Dedication.
yeah, dedication. And I guess it shows how important it is to some people to find the right donor.
Absolutely. It really underscores like the globalization of reproductive technology.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it. Okay, so we've talked about the good stuff. So let's be real. There's got to be some downsides too, right? What are some of the disadvantages of double donation IVF?
Well, I think the biggest one for a lot of people is the lack of genetic connection. Like neither parent is genetically related to the child.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be a hard thing to grapple with.
It is, and it's a really personal decision. I mean, it can be really emotionally challenging to navigate those feelings.
Totally. It really kind of challenges our traditional ideas about family, doesn't it?
It does, it does. And then, of course, you have the legal stuff, which can be pretty complex.
Oh, right. I bet the laws around all this are super complicated.
They are. I mean, it really depends on where you are in the world. But, donor anonymity, parental rights, even just the process of selecting donors, it can all vary so much.
So it's not just the medical and emotional aspects, but also this whole legal landscape to navigate.
Exactly. And don't forget the DNA stuff. Like, what if the child wants to find out about their genetic heritage later on?
Right, right, right. That's a whole other can of worms.
It is. Access to donor information is not, it's not a guarantee everywhere. So it's definitely something to think about.
So we've talked about the pros and cons, but how does double donation IVF actually stack up against other types of IVF?
Okay, so think about it this way. You've got traditional IVF, where you're using the couple's own eggs and sperm.
Right, the classic way.
Exactly. Then you have egg donation IVF, where just the egg is from a donor,
Mhm.
and then sperm donation, where obviously it's just the sperm. So double donation is unique because it's entirely donor material.
Got it. So it's like the full donor experience.
Yeah, you could say that. And OVU.com points out that this can actually be a good thing. Like with double donation, you have a bigger pool of potential donors to choose from.
Right, which makes sense. More
Yeah,
options.
exactly. And that can be really helpful for people with specific needs or, preferences about their donor.
I bet. But it also probably brings up even more, like, legal and ethical questions,
Yeah.
since it's relying on donors for everything.
You're right, it does. It's definitely more complex in a lot of ways.
Definitely food for thought. I think the big takeaway here is, like, do your research, folks. This is a big decision.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask questions. There are experts out there who can guide you through all of this.
Exactly.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive on double donation IVF.
Part 2.
Yes. In the first part, we talked about, like, who chooses this method and why.
The big questions.
Exactly. But now let's get into, like, the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, let's talk about the actual process.
The how-to.
Okay, so from what I've been reading on OVU.com, there's actually, like, a lot more to it than just picking some donors and, hoping for the best.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely not that simple.
So break it down for us. What are the steps involved?
Well, usually the first thing is a consultation with a fertility specialist.
Okay, so like a one-on-one.
Yeah, basically. It's where you talk about your situation, like your medical history, your goals for IVF, all that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a chance to, like, get all your questions answered and figure out if this is the right, path for you.
Exactly. And for the specialist to get to know you and your, needs and expectations.
Right. So once you've had the consultation, what's next?
Well, assuming everyone's on board, the next step is to create, like, a personalized treatment plan.
Ooh, a personalized plan. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, it's important. It's basically a roadmap for your double donation journey. It'll outline everything from medications to the timing of, procedures, all the way to, like, the overall timeline.
Okay, so it's all about, like, syncing up everything, right? The biological processes with the practical stuff.
Right. And speaking of syncing up, one of the really fascinating things about double donation IVF is cycle synchronization.
Cycle synchronization, what's that?
So the prospective mother's menstrual cycle actually has to be perfectly aligned with the egg donor cycle, to make sure the embryo transfer happens at the right time.
Oh, I see. So it's like maximizing the chances of success.
Exactly. Exactly. And while we're on the topic of syncing up, let's talk about one of the most crucial steps, which is choosing your donors.
Okay, yeah, this is like a big one, right? You're basically choosing the genetic makeup of your future child.
It's huge. And thankfully, these days, clinics have amazing databases of potential donors.
Really? Like, how does that work?
So they'll have these detailed profiles, like super detailed. You can learn about their physical characteristics, medical history, genetic background, even like their interests and hobbies sometimes.
Wow, so you really get a sense of who they are, not just, their genes.
Right. And often clinics will have counselors who can help you sort through it all.
I bet. Because, I mean, that must be overwhelming. It's like, how do you even begin to choose?
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way. So having that support is really important.
Totally. So let's say you've chosen your egg donor. What about the sperm donor? Do you, like, choose them at the same time?
Usually, yeah. And it's pretty much the same process. You get access to those detailed profiles and, you work with your counselor to find the right fit.
So it's almost like building a genetic puzzle.
Right.
Like you're carefully selecting each piece with the help of experts.
That's a great way to put it. Now, once you have your donors, the next stage is fertilization and embryo development.
Ooh, this is where the magic happens.
It does, and all that magic takes place in the lab. The retrieved eggs are fertilized, either through traditional IVF, which is, where they just mix the sperm and egg,
Right.
or through something called ICSI, where they actually inject a single sperm directly into an egg.
Oh, wow. So there are options even within the fertilization process.
Yep. And once fertilization is successful, they really take care of those embryos.
Like how so?
Well, they're constantly monitoring them, making sure they're growing and developing properly. It's like a high-tech nursery for embryos.
They're looking for the superstar embryos, right?
Yeah.
The ones that have the best chance.
Exactly. They're checking for healthy growth, good division, overall health, all of that.
So it's like the microscopic Olympics. Only the top performers make it to the next round.
Huh. I love that. And the next round is embryo selection and transfer.
Okay, so this is the moment of truth, the time when those embryos actually get a chance to, to implant.
Yep. The embryologist will choose the healthiest embryo, or sometimes embryos, depending on the situation, and they carefully transfer them to the prospective mother's uterus.
And then is it just a waiting game?
Pretty much. Those next few weeks are really crucial. That's when the embryo is, trying to implant and a potential pregnancy is established.
Right. And then you have those blood tests to confirm if it was successful.
Exactly.
I can't even imagine the anticipation during that wait.
I'm sure it's a lot. And, it's important to remember that not every transfer is successful.
Yeah, that's true. So what happens if the test is negative? Is that like the end of the road?
Not always. Many clinics offer something called frozen embryo transfer.
Okay, what's that?
So they can freeze any extra viable embryos from the initial cycle. And if the first transfer doesn't work, you can try again using those frozen embryos.
Ah, so it's like a backup plan.
Exactly. It gives you another chance without having to go through that whole egg retrieval and fertilization process all over again.
That's great. So there's still hope even if the first attempt doesn't pan out.
Right. And I think it's important to emphasize that, every journey is unique. The specifics of your experience with double donation IVF will depend on like your medical history, the clinic you choose, and a lot of individual factors.
Right. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Definitely not. But speaking of unique journeys, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, all that legal and ethical stuff.
Right, right. Because that can get pretty complicated.
It can. And it's important to address those considerations, not just in the beginning, but throughout the entire process.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into double donation IVF. And I think it's time to talk about something that's really important, but maybe not always, at the forefront of everyone's minds.
You mean like all the legal and ethical stuff?
Exactly. That's the stuff that can get pretty tricky.
Yeah, no doubt. It's definitely a crucial part of the whole process. And I think it's so important for people to be informed right from the get-go.
So let's just jump right in. What are some of the big, legal and ethical things that people need to be thinking about when it comes to double donation IVF?
Well, one of the biggest ones is donor anonymity.
Oh, right, right. Because in some places, donors can stay totally anonymous, but then other places, the children conceived through donation, they have a right to find out who their donor is when they're older.
Exactly. It's different everywhere. And it can create some really, some tricky situations.
Yeah, for sure. Like, what if a donor doesn't want to be contacted? Or what if the parents, they change their minds later on?
Right. Those are all things that you really have to consider beforehand. And it's not just anonymity. There are questions about parental rights and responsibilities, too.
Oh, yeah, like, legally speaking, does using donor gametes change anything about, who's considered the parent?
It can. What happens if, say, a donor decides later on that they want to be involved in the child's life? Or, the opposite, what if the parents want to cut off all contact with the donor?
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It sounds like you really need, some serious legal advice to figure all this stuff out.
You really do. I mean, it's important to work with a clinic that's, reputable and to get legal advice from someone who specializes in reproductive law.
Okay, so it's all about being prepared and knowing your rights.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. But beyond the legal aspects, there are also, some deeper ethical questions to consider. Well, some people argue that using donor gametes, it commodifies human life. You're reducing a child to, something that can be designed and bought.
That's heavy stuff.
It is, and it forces us to really grapple with, the implications of this technology on a societal level.
It's like we're changing the very definition of family and parenthood, which can be pretty controversial.
Absolutely. But then on the other hand, you have people who believe that double donation IVF is this amazing opportunity. It gives people who might not otherwise be able to become parents, a chance to have a family.
So it's like it challenges traditional ideas about biological ties and expands our understanding of what family can be.
Right. It's fascinating, how one technology can spark such a wide range of opinions and beliefs.
For sure. I think it just goes to show how complex this whole issue really is.
It really does. There's no, easy answer. And ultimately, it comes down to each individual's values and beliefs and, weighing the potential consequences.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. We talked about like the actual process of double donation IVF, the pros and cons, all the emotional stuff, and all those complicated legal and ethical considerations.
It's a lot to digest, but I think if there's one main takeaway, it's that being informed is key. Do your research, talk to the experts, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into double donation IVF.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope this episode has helped you, understand this unique path to parenthood a little bit better. And until next time, keep on exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.